Hello everyone, and welcome to the wonderful recap of Oz. My name is Justin Peavy, and I will be reading through L. Frank Baum's novels and diving into a few of the countless film, television, stage, and literary adaptations taking place in the magical land of Oz. The last three of L. Frank Baum's Oz books are the only ones whose original complete manuscripts still exist. All of his others are reported to have been destroyed by his widow, Maud, after his death. When the 12th Oz book was originally conceived in the summer of 1916, it was titled as The Twin Tin Woodman of Oz, and it contained hundreds of textual differences from the published product of 1918. The manuscript currently resides at the Harry Ransom Research Center of the University of Texas, with some additional chapter drafts being housed at Yale University. The Tin Woodman of Oz is the last of Baum's Oz books to be released in his lifetime, and the last one to be released under the Riley & Britton Publishing Company imprint. In 1919, the publishers would then become the Riley & Lee Company. This 12th Oz book reinvigorated sales for all of Baum's books, as the publishing company saw a significant increase in sales, reversing an 8-year declining trend that began with the publication of Book 6, The Emerald City of Oz. Many believe this was due to the American people looking for a nostalgic escape in the midst of World War I. Regardless, the story told in this book proves to be among some of Baum's most popular, and has been adapted multiple times. In 1970, Disneyland Records released an album entitled The Story and Songs of the Tin Woodman of Oz, a loose adaptation of this book featuring 3 original songs, and including Dallas McKennon of Gumby fame, and a teenage Ron Howard in its voice cast. In 2007, a full-length computer-animated film was produced by Hash Incorporated through their Animation Master software. To describe it in words wouldn't do justice to how strange it looks, although it is overall a faithful adaptation. I was able to find both of these on YouTube. It should also be noted that the origin story of the Tin Woodman was adapted into a 2012 stage play entitled The Woodsman. With music by Edward W. Hardy, lyrics by Jennifer Loring, and a book by James Ortiz, this off-Broadway Obie Award-winning production was praised for its unique utilization of live performers, puppetry, music, and limited spoken dialogue. A professional video recording was produced in 2016, and it's available through Broadway HD's streaming service. And now I will tell you all the tale of the Tin Woodman of Oz, being a faithful story of the astonishing adventure undertaken by the Tin Woodman, assisted by Woot the Wanderer, the Scarecrow of Oz, and Polychrome the Rainbow's daughter. A young Gilligan boy, referred to as Woot the Wanderer, stumbles upon the Tin Castle in Winkie Country. After learning that this is where the Emperor of the Winkies, a Tin Woodman, lives, he asks a Winkie servant if he can meet their leader. The servant requests permission from the Tin Woodman himself before allowing Woot inside, where he becomes acquainted with the Emperor and his best friend, the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow inquires about the boy's origins, and he explains that he found his home, friends, and family very boring. This inspired him to leave his home and explore other parts of Oz, meeting strange people and seeing new things. He's been wandering for a year, and his newest adventure has brought him to the Tin Castle. The Tin Woodman offers some food to his guest, who then asks how the Emperor became a Tin Man. Some of you might remember this story from Book 1, but this version is much more detailed and perhaps slightly different from what you've heard before. The Tin Woodman used to be called Nick Chopper, and he lived in Munchkin Country. He fell in love with a Munchkin girl by the name of Nimmie Amee. She lived with the Wicked Witch of the East and was forced to complete all of the witch's chores around the house. She and Nick had gotten acquainted when she was forced to cut firewood. Nick fell in love with her and would bring firewood to her so she didn't have to cut it. He eventually proposed to her, which angered the witch. She enchanted Nick's axe, so next time he used it, it slipped and cut off his leg. He went to a tinsmith who made him a new leg, and he returned to Nimmie Amee. The witch continued to grow angrier and angrier as Nick kept returning to visit Nimmie Amee. She kept enchanting the axe to chop off more parts of Nick's body, which were ultimately replaced by the tinsmith. Finally, the axe chopped his body in two. The witch then seized the axe and cut his body into pieces. Nimmie Amee found him and carried the pieces to the tinsmith, and he received a new body. Her love for him was just as strong as ever. The day came when the axe chopped off Nick's head, and the witch stole the head and hid it so that it could not be reattached. Nimmie Amee brought the body back to the tinsmith where a new head was fashioned for him. However, he realized he no longer loved Nimmie Amee, since his tin body no longer contained a heart. He went looking for a new heart one day in the forest when his joints began to rust. Unfortunately, he had forgotten to oil them, and he rusted so badly that he was unable to move for days. That is, until he was rescued by Dorothy and the Scarecrow. That's when he learned that the Wicked Witch of the East had been crushed after Dorothy's house landed on her, turning her to dust. Dorothy and the Scarecrow brought the Tin Woodman with them to the Emerald City, where the Wizard of Oz gave Nick a new heart. According to the Tin Woodman, however, he was given a kind heart, rather than a loving heart, so he found he still could not love Nimmie Amee. Woot is troubled by the idea that the Tin Woodman's true love had been deserted, and recommends that he should return to Nimmie Amee, marry her as he promised even if he can't love her, and make her his Empress of the Winkies. The Scarecrow agrees with this idea, and the Tin Woodman admits it's one that hasn't crossed his mind before. Therefore, he decides to travel to Munchkin country with Woot and the Scarecrow to find Nimmie Amee. Even if he can't love her, he can still give her a life of happiness. The next morning, preparations are made for their journey. Woot receives a knapsack of food since he's the only one amongst the three who eats. The Tin Woodman's axe is sharpened and polished, and the Scarecrow carries an oil can to use as necessary. They decide to travel around the Emerald City, passing through Gilligan country before arriving in Munchkin country, despite the potential dangers they may face. They set out on their journey and don't meet any excitement for 2 days until they reach Gilligan country. When Woot is awakened on the morning of the third day, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman reveal that they have come across a sign that reads, "All strangers are warned not to follow this path to Loonville." The Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow are very intrigued to learn more about Loonville, while Woot sees the sign as a warning of possible jeopardy. Regardless, he decides to accompany them. They follow the path to Loonville after Woot has some breakfast. They wander through a thick forest when they find a large clearing lit by an unseen source with trees forming a dome around them. Here they encounter the loons, rubber-like creatures that are round and puffy. They rush towards the travelers very suddenly and quickly overcome them. Woot, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman are tied up with vines, and a loon announces they will take their prisoners to King Ball. The three of them are dragged to the center of the clearing. They are placed in front of a throne attached to a string leading upwards into the trees. One of the loons grabs the string and begins to pull it. Attached to the other end of the string is King Ball, now making his descent. King addresses Pantaloon, the loon which summoned him, asking if the prisoners are dangerous. Pantaloon isn't sure how to answer, and when he walks away, there is a loud sound and Pantaloon pops, leaving his rubbery skin in a heap on the ground. A loon by the name of Till then mends a hole in his foot, and she begins to pump air back into him. The loons try to see if their prisoners would pop like they would, and bring a sharp thorn to test this theory. The thorn doesn't harm the Scarecrow or the Tin Woodman, but then it's Woot's turn to be tested. He is pricked by the thorn and shouts in pain. He bursts out of the vines that bind him and kicks the loon that pricked him. The loon is shot upwards into the air, where he pops and his skin falls to the ground. Woot then grabs the thorn that pricked him. He begins popping loons, chasing them as they scream with fear. Afterwards, he frees the Tin Woodman, and the Scarecrow sets his eyes on King Balloon. The king lets himself float upwards again, still being attached to the string, in order to escape. The Scarecrow decides that there's no further use in popping any more loons, and they had a right to capture them since they deliberately ignored a warning. They leave Loonville peacefully, and continue on their journey. Eventually, they find an oversized castle, something they were unaware existed in Gilligan country. Upon further investigation, they find words carved over the doorway, labeling it Yoop Castle. The Scarecrow recognizes the name Yoop, since they encountered the giant in a cage in Quadling country in Book 7. They presume the castle belongs to him and is now deserted since Mr. Yoop was captured. So, they enter the castle, having to climb onto each other's shoulders just to reach the latch. Once they are inside, the door closes by itself, as if by magic. At the end of a corridor, they find a room occupied by a giantess, wearing a lace apron and eating her supper. She invites the strangers inside and requests information on why they have come into her home. They reveal that they thought the house was unoccupied, and Mrs. Yoop explains that her husband was captured because he would eat local cows and sheep and occasionally destroy houses when he was angry. When he was captured, she transformed herself into a mouse and hid. She was ultimately relieved that her husband was taken away so she could have full control over the castle she lived in, and so she wouldn't have to deal with his anger issues any further. Woot wonders if the giantess is a witch, and she responds that she is a yookoohoo, a creature that is known for their clever magic skills and being artists in transformation. She's glad to have new visitors, since she hasn't had any new company since she transformed Polychrome, the rainbow's daughter, into a canary bird. She reveals Polychrome had danced off of the rainbow and fell asleep in a nearby valley. She was then captured by Mrs. Yoop and transformed. She had hoped to have a bird who would sing and talk with the giantess, but Polychrome has refused to say a word since she was captured. This makes the travelers uneasy, knowing how powerful Mrs. Yoop must be to have transformed a fairy like Polychrome. The giantess then announces that she will be capturing her visitors as well, and plans to transform them the next morning. This deeply concerns them, as well as the fact that Mrs. Yoop transforms anything she wants into appetizing things she can eat. Therefore, the biscuits she is eating at her dinner table used to be field mice, and the honey she is using used to be a wasp's nest. Despite her wicked plan, she is very accommodating to her guests, offering them a seat while she does some embroidering. She asks more about their journey, and this is when she learns of Nimmie Amee, as well as the other adventures the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman have endured since Dorothy came to Oz. The Scarecrow declares that Ozma would punish Mrs. Yoop if she knew about the illegal magic she performs. This angers Mrs. Yoop, who then retires for the evening. Despite the upset, she still conjures a bed for Woot to sleep in. All night long, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman look for a way to escape, with no success. Mrs. Yoop offers Woot some breakfast the next morning, but he is hesitant. She explains that he doesn't need to be concerned about the food, because nothing she transforms can ever get back to its former shape again. Woot takes this opportunity to beg the giantess not to transform them, but she is only concerned about her satisfaction and nobody else's. After she finishes her meal, she changes the Tin Woodman into an owl. He does maintain his tin exterior, but his shape changes to Mrs. Yoop's liking. She then transforms the Scarecrow into a stuffed bear and Woot into a green monkey. Using her magic, she also manipulates her 3 prisoners into being happy with their new forms. Mrs. Yoop goes into her bedroom and comes back out carrying a golden cage containing a yellow canary. She introduces the transformed Polychrome to the newest captives, but the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman have already become acquainted with her. They share in their misfortune that they couldn't escape the Yookoohoo's magic, and Mrs. Yoop tells them to accept their fate and move on. Then she leaves the castle to go on her morning walk. With the giantess gone, Polychrome the canary reveals that Mrs. Yoop's lace apron is what gives her her magic. The magic of the apron is the only way she can open the doors and windows in her castle. The only time she isn't wearing her apron is when she goes to bed. Woot the monkey decides to try and slip into her room later that night, but Polychrome warns him that if anyone thinks about their plan, Mrs. Yoop will be able to read their minds. When Mrs. Yoop returns, she goes in and out of her bedroom throughout the day, but Woot can never make it through the door before she closes it. Woot creates a new tactic, befriending the woman and gaining her trust. As she's going to bed, she opens the door but realizes she's forgotten something. While she retrieves it, Woot the monkey slips into her bedroom and hides under the bed. The giantess hangs up Polychrome's bird cage and undresses for bed, leaving her apron on her bedpost. As soon as the lights are out and Mrs. Yoop begins to snore, Woot finds the apron and ties it around his waist. He is able to climb up to the birdcage and carry it to the door. He commands the door to open, which awakens Mrs. Yoop. He runs out the door and it shuts behind him, before the Yookoohoo can reach him. She pounds on the door in anger as Woot the monkey, the tin owl, the stuffed bear, and Polychrome the canary flee the castle. After running for a while, they're able to relax, knowing that Mrs. Yoop won't be pursuing them. Now that they've escaped their captor, they must learn how to transform to their normal selves. Woot and Polychrome sleep in the valley and they all head east the next morning to search for food. They discuss the possibility of visiting Glinda to see if the spells on them can be reversed, and decide to travel south to Quadling Country after they find some food. Suddenly, an enormous jaguar pursues them. The Tin Owl, the Canary, and the Monkey are able to escape by climbing or flying into the trees. The straw-stuffed bear, however, is left on the ground. The jaguar is disappointed to find that the bear is not made of meat, and sets his eyes on the bear's companions. Upon learning that the owl is made out of tin, and Polychrome can easily escape by means of flight, he decides to pursue the green monkey. Woot begins sprinting through the trees while the jaguar chases him on the ground. Woot trips on the magic apron he is wearing and falls to the ground, where he's pinned down by the jaguar. The only method of escape that Woot can think of is to call out the command, "Open." Just then, the ground opens up beneath him, swallows Woot, and closes again. Polychrome decides to help the jaguar obtain some breakfast. She is still able to perform some magic, even in her transformed state, and conjures up some scrambled eggs on toast. After consuming his meal, he leaves the travelers in peace. Meanwhile, below the Earth's surface, Woot falls for quite some time before he lands on a rocky floor. He finds himself in an underground cave surrounded by dozens of dragons that have just awakened. They look at the monkey and contemplate eating him as it's been many years since their last meal. Woot tries to escape, dodging the dragon's breaths of fire. He climbs up the wall of the rocky cavern until he is stuck against the ceiling. The dragons close in on him just before he shouts, "Open." A hole appears above him and he's able to escape. He does reappear in the presence of the jaguar, but he is still full from breakfast and has no intention of eating the monkey. So Woot begins to wander back to his friends. Having been reunited, the four of them begin traveling south and arrive in the country of the Munchkins. The Scarecrow Bear reveals that they're not far from the home of his friend, the former General Ginger, and she may be able to take care of them. Along the way to Ginger's house, they find a very strange Munchkin with a long body attached to 10 pairs of legs. The young man introduces himself as Tommy Quickstep, and his peculiar shape was the result of an accidental wish he had made. He would constantly run errands for people in Munchkin Country, and a sorceress agreed to grant him a wish in return. As he grew tired, he haphazardly wished he had 20 legs, and suddenly it was so. When he tried to return to the witch, she couldn't be found, so he's been unable to reverse the spell. Polychrome, however, is able to easily return Tommy Quickstep to a normal, two-legged Munchkin boy. He thanks Polychrome, learns his lesson to be careful as to what he says from this point forward, and leaves. Eventually, they all reach Ginger's house. She's nowhere to be seen, so the Scarecrow Bear decides they should let themselves in. While they continue to deliberate whether or not they'll ever be restored to their true forms, Ginger arrives at home and begins chasing the intruders with a broom. The Scarecrow Bear protests and is able to reveal their true identities, explaining their encounter with Mrs. Yoop. Ginger apologizes and tells them to make themselves at home. Before I move on, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to all of you about Anchor. Anchor is a free and easy-to-use podcast creator that allows you to record and edit your own podcast from your phone or your computer. They will also distribute your podcast, making it accessible on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms. Again, it is totally free. In fact, you can actually make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Hi, I'm Karen.
And I'm Colleen.
And this is Books,
Movies,
and Musicals.
Oh my. Come join us as we discuss our favorite childhood stories in analytical and honest ways.
Most recently, we've been discussing Harry Potter and Disney princesses.
We have so many more ideas and we can't wait to go through them with you.
So, keep it magical.
And leave a little magic wherever you go. Bye!
The land of Oz was not always a fairyland. It used to be like any other place in the world. isolated because it's surrounded by a desert. One day, the fairy band of Queen Lurline passed over Oz and enchanted the country, and she left behind one of her fairies to rule the land. From that point forward, nobody aged, got sick, or died of natural causes. Even those from the outside world who enter it meet this fate, including Princess Dorothy from Kansas and her best friend, Princess Ozma. The two of them are sitting in Ozma's private quarters when Dorothy decides to take a look at Ozma's magic picture to catch up with her friends. She sees the Tin Woodman the day he leaves his castle with the Scarecrow and Woot the Wanderer. She continues to follow their adventures, catching up to the point where the three of them have been transformed into different creatures. Ozma is unsure if her magic will be able to break the Yookoohoo's enchantments, but she decides to travel with Dorothy to Ginger's ranch to see what can be done. Later that day, the Sawhorse travels to Munchkin country, carrying Dorothy, Toto, and Ozma in the red wagon. They arrive just as Ginger is cleaning the green monkey's fur. Ozma announces that she will do her best to reverse Mrs. Yoop's magic, but there are no guarantees that she can do this successfully. She pulls out a small silver wand and is able to return the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman to their original forms, and has to work even harder to get Polychrome back to her normal self. However, Ozma is unable to help Woot the monkey because Mrs. Yoop's spell had included a very difficult clause that the green monkey must exist in the land of Oz for all time. Not even Glinda will be able to transform the monkey back to a boy. Ozma does reveal that he can exchange forms with some other person. It's Polychrome who comes up with the idea to give Mrs. Yoop the form of Woot the Wanderer, and then swap the bodies of Woot and the green monkey. Ozma agrees to this complicated mission to punish the wicked deeds and illegal magic practices of the Yookoohoo. Ginger and Ozma perform a magic ceremony so they can see Mrs. Yoop in the present time. They see her weaving a new lace apron to replace her stolen one, with a cruel expression suggesting that she is plotting revenge. Everyone watches as Ozma uses her magic wand and transforms Mrs. Yoop so she may carry the form of Woot the Wanderer. The Yookoohoo is angry, but she can do nothing to stop Ozma, who then switches the bodies of Mrs. Yoop and Woot. Woot the Wanderer has now been restored to his natural form, while Mrs. Yoop is forced to live out the rest of her days as a green monkey with no magical powers whatsoever. Ozma invites everyone to her palace in the Emerald City, but Woot decides to continue on the Tin Woodman's journey to find Nimmie Amee. Ozma then agrees to give the Tin Woodman a grand wedding should he and Nimmie Amee decide to become Emperor and Empress. They all bid Ginger goodbye and ride on the red wagon to a great forest, where Woot, Polychrome, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman resume their journey, while the rest of their party returns to the Emerald City. The Tin Woodman recognizes his forest as the one he was born in, the one where Nimmie Amee lived with the witch, and where the cottage of Quickstep the tinsmith stands. They even come across the site where the Tin Woodman was caught in a rainstorm, rusted for months until he was rescued by Dorothy and the Scarecrow. As they venture into the forest, they're shocked to find a second man made of tin, an exact duplicate of the Tin Woodman. The only thing distinguishing the two is the fact that this Tin Man carries a sword, while the Tin Woodman carries an axe. They use the oil can on the Tin Soldier, allowing him to move and speak. The Tin Soldier tells a story that is quite familiar. He fell in love with a Munchkin girl named Nimmie Amee, who was mourning the loss of her former sweetheart Nick Chopper at the time. The witch she lived with didn't want them to marry, so she enchanted his sword to cut him into pieces. Then the tinsmith Quickstep gave him a new tin body, but the man lost his ability to love when he lost his meat heart. Regardless, he agreed to marry Nimmie Amee, and on the day of their wedding, it rained, he rusted, and had been stuck in the forest for a very long time. The story of the two men made of tin who loved the same girl astonishes the travelers. The Tin Woodman gives the Tin Soldier his own side of the story, and they decide to see Nimmie Amee and see which of the two she would choose to marry. They become friends, and the Tin Soldier gives his name as Captain Fighter. After walking for 2 hours, they find the house of Nimmie Amee completely deserted, having been abandoned for a long time. They then decide to travel to the cottage of Quickstep to ask what's become of Nimmie Amee. They arrive at the cottage at the far edge of the forest, but the tinsmith isn't home. They let themselves into the workshop, a familiar place to the Tin Woodman and Captain Fighter. They both recall that all of their meat parts were put into a barrel before they were replaced with tin. They look around the workshop and the Tin Woodman opens one of the cupboards. Inside, he sees a familiar-looking human head, who reveals that he used to belong to a man named Nick Chopper. The Tin Woodman is surprised that he is talking to his own human head, which remains just as it was since it was chopped off by the enchanted axe. Nick's head doesn't have the cheeriest disposition since it's been separated from the rest of him, and doesn't seem to recall much of his previous life. Captain Fighter tries to find his own head in the cupboards, but is unsuccessful. At the request of Nick's head, the Tin Woodman closes the cupboard door and leaves his old head alone. At this time, Quickstep arrives and is surprised to see both of his tin men have visited him. They all sit down and relay their respective adventures since their last meeting. They also explain that they are searching for Nimmie Amee and ask what's become of her. Quickstep reveals that she wept bitterly when the tin soldier didn't marry her, and this bothered the witch so much that she beat her with a stick and went on an errand to fetch some magic herbs to transform the girl into an old hag. It was on this errand that she was crushed by Dorothy's house. Quickstep then sent Nimmie Amee to find the witch's silver shoes, but learned Dorothy had taken them. Then the girl decided to live with people she knew on Mount Munch and has not been seen since. After the witch was destroyed, Quickstep went to her home to help himself to things that were left behind. He found some magic glue which is used to mend people after they've been cut. He used the glue to construct a man named Chopfight, using the mismatched pieces of both Nick and Fighter's bodies, hence why Fighter can't find his head in Quickstep's workshop. He only had one arm to give to the man, so he made a second one out of tin. Chopfight didn't prove to be a very good assistant, so the tinsmith happily allowed Chopfight to leave the workshop and explore the rest of the world. This was the last he ever saw of his creation. With the new information from Quickstep, the travelers decide to go towards Mount Munch to find Nimmie Amee. While they're walking in the direction of Mount Munch, Woot is shocked to find that all of his companions have suddenly disappeared. Upon further inspection, he finds that his body is also invisible. Not being able to see themselves, they bump into one another and cause the Tin Men to crash to the ground. They have wandered to a part of Oz that makes people invisible. They still see Mount Munch in the distance, so they struggle to hold hands and carefully continue to walk in that direction. Suddenly, they hear a gruff voice in front of them. This invisible creature announces itself as the hippo giraffe, who loves to eat straw. He smells the Scarecrow and begins to sniff around the party to find him. The group is able to cleverly conceal the Scarecrow and they escape the creature. Eventually, they escape this invisible strip of country and are able to see each other again. They've arrived just before a very deep ditch, preventing them from further passage. They hear a growl behind them and discover that the hippo giraffe has found them. The creature has thick, leathery skin and a very long neck, and he set his eyes on the Scarecrow. The straw man's companions jump to his defense and try to bargain with the animal. They ultimately come to a very difficult agreement. They will allow the hippo giraffe to eat the Scarecrow's straw if they can use his long neck as a bridge to pass over the ditch. After this is done, Polychrome folds up the Scarecrow's clothes and Woot carries his head. The hippo giraffe keeps his promise and helps the travelers over the ditch. Once they reach the other side, Polychrome uses some magic to mend the dents and scrapes on the tin bodies from their crash, and they find some hay to fill the Scarecrow with until they can get some straw. They arrive at a small Munchkin home and wonder if this is where Nimmie Amee lives. They knock on the door and a window opens, revealing a pig by the name of Mrs. Squealina Swine. She is quickly joined by her husband, Grunter Swine, professor of cabbage culture and corn perfection. They offer carrots and turnips from their garden to Woot, as well as some straw for the Scarecrow. They also allow them to camp out for the night in their garden, as long as they leave the next day. The next morning, they thank the pigs for their hospitality. Upon further discussion, the pigs reveal that they had 9 tiny piglets that were adopted by the Wizard of Oz. The Scarecrow reveals that they are familiar with the piglets, and the parents are glad to hear that their children are happy. That morning, the 4 of them continue to walk towards Mount Munch. Shortly after noon, they approach a house at the foot of the mountain. They try to walk towards it, but they're stopped by an unseen force field. A rabbit appears from a burrow in the ground and explains that this unseen wall is 6 feet thick and a mile high, meant to prevent strangers from bothering the home's owner, Nimmie Amee. Everyone is excited to have reached Nimmie Amee, but wonders how they can get past the barrier. When they find out that the burrow goes under the wall and leads into Nimmie Amee's garden, Polychrome asks if the rabbit will permit them to travel through it. Polychrome uses her magic to shrink them all down to a size that allows them to comfortably walk through the underground tunnel. Once they come out on the other side, Polychrome restores them to their proper sizes, and they walk towards the house. The two men of tin are anxious to see their former sweetheart again, and are curious to know which of the two of them she will choose to marry. They knock on the door, which is hesitantly opened by Nimmie Amee. She doesn't recognize the two men of tin at first, but once they introduce themselves, she smiles and lets them inside. The Tin Woodman and the Tin Soldier are shocked to find that there is another man in the house. When Captain Fighter realizes the man is wearing his head and one tin arm, he is recognized to be Kuklip's creation, Chop Fight. Both of the tin men become very defensive and disturbed upon seeing their body parts mixed together, but Nimmie Amee asks them to be respectful in the presence of her husband. She reveals that she married Chop Fight long ago after both of the tin men had deserted her. She didn't know what became of them, but she fell in love with Chop Fight because he reminded her of both of her lovers. The Tin Woodman and Captain Fighter see how happy Nimmie Amee is in her house with her well-trained Frankenstein husband, and she openly denies the request to become Empress of the Winkies. Woot is distressed that this journey has been for nothing, but the Tin Woodman is glad to know that Nimmie Amee has found happiness. At this time, a rainstorm threatens to pass over Nimmie Amee's house. They say goodbye to the Munchkin girl and make their way to the burrow. Polychrome once again makes them small, and they stay in the underground tunnel until the rain passes. Once this is done, they return to the Earth's surface, beyond the barrier, and are once again restored to their true sizes. A rainbow promptly appears, and Woot watches in amazement as Polychrome meets her sisters on the arch, which melts into the sky and disappears just as quickly as it came. The rest of the party takes a direct route to travel to the Emerald City, where they are entertained at Ozma's palace. A banquet is served where their story is properly relayed, and Ozma elects to make Captain Fighter a soldier of hers. He is sent to Gillikin Country to keep order amongst the strange creatures there. Woot is allowed to continue to wander wherever he'd like, as Ozma promises to watch over his adventures and protect him as best as she's able. The Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow return to the Tin Castle in Winky Country, where they continue to enjoy sleepless nights, amusing themselves in friendly conversation. The best part of this book for me is revisiting a story that we heard very briefly in the very first book. In terms of a sequel, it builds on the origins of a beloved character very well and reveals new circumstances around the Tin Woodman's creation, which is very interesting. The Oz books are able to stand on their own, but I really enjoy when they expand upon the plot lines from previous books, rather than rehashing the same plot devices. I know Ginger was a bit of an anti-hero in Book 2, and we've been told that she's reformed and befriended the Scarecrow in particular, but if I recall, this is the first chance we get to really spend some time with her since the events of Book 2. I like this redemption of her character, although I wish it occurred more so in an arc. But still, she went from a misguided character to a strong ally, and I think that's pretty cool. In regards to Mrs. Yoop, the giantess, the Yookoohoo, I feel really bad for her. This is a woman who came from an unhappy and partially abusive marriage and is now extremely lonely in her castle. If she leaves the castle, she will be captured by enemies, so she can't have any friends or acquaintances unless she imprisons them. I wish she was able to find a healthier way of making relationships, but in terms of a villain, I don't think she is one. I think she's very desperate, and that makes me really sad for her. Now that she's a green monkey, though, maybe she'll have better luck in making new acquaintances, now that she doesn't have to hide from the people who imprisoned her husband. Maybe that's what's best for her. From what we know about Baum's original manuscript, the chapters that include Tommy Quickstep, the Hippo Giraffe, and the Swines were not in the original draft. It makes sense that these are all later additions, since they seem a little out of place, interrupting the flow of the story and providing their own little continuity errors. For example, in this book we learn that the Swines are the parents of the wizard's 9 tiny piglets, and he offered to care for them and educate them. This doesn't make sense, as he had the piglets already when he returned to Oz in Book 4. In Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, he also explains that he obtained the piglets from a sailor in Los Angeles in exchange for circus tickets. That's where he learned the piglets originally came from the island of Teentyweent, where everything is small. And speaking of continuity errors, there is one detail from this book that retcons a detail told in the first. According to the Tin Woodman's original story, Nimmie Amee was a servant for an old woman who enlisted the help of the Wicked Witch of the East to separate him from the girl. However, in this retelling, Nimmie Amee was the servant of the witch herself. Other than that, this seems to be a pretty accurate retelling of the story from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I only have a couple of quotes from this book that resonated with me, because I think this book was much more plot-driven. In other books, Baum is able to sprinkle his views throughout, but this one didn't seem to allow many opportunities for that. Regardless, here they are. Duty is a bugle call to action, whether you are inclined to act or not. Said by the Tin Woodman. Fear does not make one a coward. Said by Woot the Wanderer. Thank you again for listening in. If you have any interest in supporting the podcast, you can visit anchor.fm/OzRecap. I hope to create some video companions to some of these episodes in the future, and becoming a supporter would help me better create content for my fellow Oz fans. If you are interested in reading the Oz series along with me, all of Baum's novels are in the public domain and available online for free. They're easy to read, and the illustrations alone are so interesting to behold. You are now all members of my Oz book club. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Well, that's all I've got. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at OzRecap for updates and more Oz content. Until next time, I'm Justin, and this has been the Wonderful Recap of Oz.